The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was sharper than the wind outside. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then I heard Rebecca's voice through the glass, flat and cold as the night around me. "Maybe this will teach you not to interfere with our family decisions." And just like that, the door shut, leaving me on the porch in nothing but a nightgown and a thin wool coat. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Snow fell hard, stinging against my bare legs, and the Colorado wind cut through me like a knife. I pressed my hand against the glass, hoping she'd turn back, but all I saw was her shadow retreating down the hall. I was 70 years old. My name is Dorothy Hayes, and in that moment, I realized my son's family, the people I had poured my heart, my time, and my money into, were willing to leave me freezing outside their home just to make a point. The cold sank into my bones, sharp and merciless. I pulled my coat tighter, but it was useless. My breath fogged the air in frantic bursts as my mind tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had we gotten here? How had love twisted into this cruel game of control? If you had asked me 2 years earlier, I would have told you I had the kind of life most women my age only dream of. A penthouse overlooking the lights of Denver. A cabin in the Rockies, where the pines stood tall and the lake shimmered in the summer sun. Nearly 4 decades of work had turned my small consulting service into one of the most trusted advisory firms in the region. My clients included community banks, small tech startups, and medical practices that grew into powerhouses. I had built not just a career, but a legacy. And yet, none of that shielded me from betrayal. I lost my husband when I was 32. A car accident on a rainy night stole him from me and left me alone with our 4-year-old son, Daniel. I promised myself and him that I would never be at the mercy of anyone again. Not of poverty, not of pity, and not of circumstance. I studied at night, worked every job I could during the day, and saved every penny until I built something worth protecting. By the time I retired, I had over $15 million in assets, enough to give Daniel and his family every opportunity they could want. That was my mistake. I thought generosity was love. I thought giving was the same as being valued. Now here I was, standing in the snow at 2 in the morning, realizing just how wrong I had been. My teeth chattered, my skin burned with cold, and yet beneath it all was a fire in my chest. A fire that whispered one truth louder than the wind. They had no idea who they had just locked out, because by 9 a.m., while they were busy calling banks and swiping cards that would no longer work, they would learn what happens when you leave the wrong woman in the cold. When the sun finally rose over the Denver skyline, I was already back in my own house. The drive home had been long, my body trembling from hours in the cold, but my mind was burning hotter than ever. I sat in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. My hands were still raw, my lips cracked from the icy wind, but I could think of only one thing: Daniel, my son. The boy I had carried on my hip through long nights of homework. The boy I had fed on borrowed money when I was a widow with nothing but determination. Somewhere along the line, he had grown into a man who let his wife slam the door in my face without lifting a hand to stop her. I wanted to tell myself it was all Rebecca, that she had poisoned him against me. And yes, Rebecca was manipulative, sharp-tongued, and greedy. She never forgave me for keeping the cabin in the Rockies titled under my name instead of gifting it to them as a wedding present. But Daniel, he had stood there, he had watched, and he had done nothing. The first crack in my trust appeared years ago, but I ignored it. It was the afternoon he asked if I could help cover a mortgage payment on their oversized suburban mansion. Just one time, he said, but one time became 2. Then came the new SUV, the private school tuition, the vacation homes. Each check I wrote was supposed to bring me closer to my son, but instead, it only built a wall of entitlement around him and Rebecca. I thought back to the night before, the sharp slam of the deadbolt, the sound of Rebecca's voice, and I knew something had changed in me. They thought I was weak. They thought age had dulled me. They thought money had blinded me. They were wrong. By the time the morning mail hit their doorstep, I had already called my attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Valerie Burns, who had been with me since the first days of my consulting firm. Valerie picked up on the first ring. "Dorothy, what happened?" she asked. She must have heard the strain in my voice. "They locked me out," I whispered. 2 in the morning. Snow, my own son. There was a pause, the kind of silence where someone decides which words will matter most. Then Valerie said, "Do you want to press charges, or do you want to press the point?" I closed my eyes, my breath steadying. "Neither. I want to make them feel what it's like to be left with nothing." By the time I hung up, the plan was already in motion. All joint accounts, all access cards, all credit lines tied to me or my name, frozen. Completely. And I wasn't finished, because Rebecca loved her status, her shopping sprees, her charity luncheons. She was about to find out how quickly power crumbles when the plastic in her purse turns useless. They had left me in the cold. Now I would let them see what cold truly felt like. It didn't take long. By the next afternoon, my phone started buzzing. Not with kind words, not with apologies, but with frantic calls. I ignored them. Instead, I sat at my window, looking out at the snow-covered street, the mug of tea in my hand warming the same fingers they'd left numb just hours before. The first voicemail was Rebecca's, her voice shrill and panicked. "Dorothy, something's wrong. My card was declined at the boutique. I know you handle the accounts. Call me back right now." I deleted it. An hour later, another message. This time, Daniel's voice, heavy and tight. "Mom, did you change something? My business card got declined at the gas station. I was humiliated. Please, just call me." I leaned back in my chair and let their words wash over me like background noise. They hadn't asked if I was okay. They hadn't asked if I'd survived the freezing night on their porch. No, their panic wasn't for me. It was for the money. By evening, the messages grew more desperate. "Mom, the mortgage draft bounced. What are you doing?" "Dorothy, I can't access our joint savings. This is serious." "Mom, answer your phone. Rebecca's crying. We can't pay for the kids' school trip." What are you trying to prove? What was I trying to prove? That their comfort was built entirely on my silence. That their laughter at the dinner table, their trips, their brand new cars, all of it existed because I allowed it to. And that night, when they turned the lock and left me out in the dark, they had forgotten who really held the keys. I remember when I first opened those accounts, years ago, when my consulting business in renewable energy finally took off. I thought sharing my success with my son would bring us closer. Daniel was just starting out then, juggling bills, a newborn, and a demanding job. I told myself helping him was what family did. But somewhere between gratitude and greed, something shifted. Rebecca stopped saying thank you. Daniel stopped looking at me with respect. And I kept paying, hoping it would buy me love I didn't realize had already been sold. Now, listening to their panic, I felt something inside me snap back into place, like a bone that had been broken and finally reset. That night, Rebecca herself showed up at my doorstep, face flushed red from the cold. She pounded the doorbell until I opened it a crack. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her breath fogging in the air between us. "We have bills, Dorothy. Children. Do you want your grandchildren to suffer?" I studied her face. She wasn't worried about the children. She was worried about her handbags, her house, her next charity luncheon. I let her words hang in the air before I answered quietly. "You left me in the snow. Did you think I'd just forget?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, Rebecca was speechless. I closed the door, and this time I locked it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pounding, not just on my door, but on my heart. Daniel's voice carried through the wood, deep and urgent. "Mom, please, we need to talk." I sat on the couch, calm, as though I had been expecting this moment all along. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. I let it finish before I rose and opened the door just enough to see his face. He looked older somehow, lines etched into his forehead that hadn't been there last week. But it wasn't age, it was desperation. "Mom, why are you doing this?" His voice cracked. Rebecca's hysterical. The kids are asking questions. I had to tell my boss I couldn't cover a business dinner. Do you know how humiliating that is? I leaned against the frame, my robe wrapped tight around me. Do you know how humiliating it is? I asked quietly. To be locked out of your own son's house like a beggar? He flinched. For a moment, the man in front of me wasn't my son at all, but a stranger. Someone who had chosen convenience over love. Mom, that was Rebecca's idea, he blurted, hands raised as if to surrender. She thought you'd understand. It was just one night. She didn't mean one night. My voice hardened. One night in the cold at my age could have killed me. You knew that, and you let it happen. His lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, he couldn't look me in the eye. The silence stretched until I filled it. You've lived off my accounts for years, Daniel. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd keep writing checks while you treated me like an unwanted guest in your life? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing on the porch. Mom, I admit, we've leaned on you too much, but freezing our accounts, that punishes the kids. They don't deserve this. It was a clever play, using my grandchildren as shields, but I had seen through clever plays my whole life. The kids will be fine, I said evenly. It's you and Rebecca who will have to adjust. Maybe for the first time, you'll understand the value of money when it doesn't come from my hand. Daniel's jaw tightened. So what, you just cut us off? After everything? You're choosing money over family? That stung, because it was twisted backwards. For years I had chosen family over money. I had drained myself to make sure he never had to feel the sting of sacrifice. And now here he stood, accusing me of the very crime he committed. I'm not choosing money over family, I told him. My voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I'm choosing dignity, mine. His eyes flickered with something, regret maybe, or just the sudden realization that the ground beneath him was shifting. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally, he stepped back, his breath fogging in the cold. You'll regret this, Mom, he said hoarsely. I closed the door gently, my hands steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel regret. I felt free. 2 days passed in silence. I almost believed Daniel had finally understood that perhaps the frost on our relationship might thaw with time. But I should have known better. It wasn't Daniel who made the next move. It was Rebecca. I first heard it at the grocery store. 2 women from church, standing by the apples, lowered their voices when I walked past. One of them gave me that pitying smile people reserve for gossip's favorite subject. By the time I reached the register, the cashier, usually chatty, barely made eye contact. My chest tightened with unease. When I stepped outside, I understood why. Rebecca stood near the entrance, her phone in hand, pretending not to see me. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk before she turned away. That evening, a neighbor called. Dorothy, she said suavely, I don't know if you're aware, but Rebecca's been saying things, that you're confused, that you've been mismanaging money, that Daniel had to step in for your safety. I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, the world tilted sideways. Eyes. Not only had they locked me out in the cold, but now they were trying to paint me as senile, to rewrite the story before anyone could ask questions. I steadied myself. Thank you for telling me, Marlene, I said. Don't believe everything you hear. But inside, fury burned hot enough to melt any snow. The next Sunday at church, whispers followed me down the aisle. I could feel them ripple like a draft against my skin. And when the pastor's wife asked gently if I needed support with my affairs, I knew the rumors had taken root. Rebecca wanted to erase my credibility. If the community believed I was unstable, then cutting Daniel and her off financially would look like an act of confusion, not strength. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my old ledger book spread before me. Every deposit, every transfer, every check I'd written for Danielle over the years stared back at me in black and white. Evidence, proof. Rebecca thought she could bury me under whispers, but she didn't know the one thing I had that she never would: records. I called an old friend the next morning, Gail, who had worked in finance before she retired. She came over with her glasses perched on her nose and a notebook in hand. Together, we organized every document into binders, neat and precise. Dorothy, Gail said, flipping through the pages, you've essentially bankrolled their entire lifestyle. House renovations, tuition, vacations, all of it. This isn't confusion. This is exploitation. Her words steadied me like a hand on my back. The more I studied those binders, the more I realized I wasn't the one on trial here. Daniel and Rebecca were. When the phone rang later that evening, it was Rebecca this time. Her voice was syrupy, false sweetness coating every word. Dorothy dear, there seems to be a misunderstanding, she purred. People are worried about you. If you'd just restore our accounts, we could clear this whole thing up. I almost laughed. She had shifted from arrogance to manipulation, from gossip to guilt, but my answer was steady, sharp. Rebecca, the only thing that will be cleared up is the truth, and I'll make sure of it. When I hung up, I realized something. They had tried to freeze me out. Now it was my turn to bring the freeze to them. One account, one rumor, one lie at a time. I didn't sleep that night. Every whisper I'd heard in church stall echoed in my head, but so did Gail's words. This isn't confusion. This is exploitation. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I called Pastor Hill. He was a kind man, level-headed, respected by nearly everyone in town. Pastor, I said, my voice steady, I need 5 minutes at the community meeting on Wednesday. I have something important to clarify. There was a pause. Then he said gently, of course, Dorothy, I'll make the space. When Wednesday came, the fellowship hall buzzed with chatter and the smell of potluck casseroles. I wore my best winter coat and carried 2 leather-bound binders under my arm. Every eye turned as I walked to the front. Daniel and Rebecca sat near the back. Rebecca's arms were folded, chin lifted in smug defiance. Daniel's face was pale, his jaw tight. Good evening, I began, my voice trembling at first, then finding its strength. Some of you may have heard rumors that I am confused, that I can no longer handle my affairs. I want you to hear the truth from me. A murmur swept the room. I opened the first binder and held up a page. These are records of every check I wrote to Daniel and Rebecca over the past 15 years. Mortgage payments, tuition bills, credit cards, vacations. My voice cracked. I helped because I believed family should look after each other. Rebecca's smile faltered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I flipped the binder open to a page marked in red. 2 weeks ago, after they locked me out in the snow, I made the decision to protect myself. I froze every account I control, not out of spite, out of necessity. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. Since then, I continued. Rebecca has been telling people I am senile, that Daniel had to step in for my safety. But I assure you, I looked directly at them. My memory is sharper than ever. What I do not forget is betrayal. Silk. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, she was outside that night, in the snow. I closed the binder slowly. I will no longer be silent. I will no longer allow lies to define me. The accounts remain frozen until there is honesty, until there is repentance. When I stepped back, the silence cracked into murmurs, then outrage. A woman stood up. Marlene, my neighbor. I saw her that night, she said firmly. She was standing on the porch, with no coat, banging on the door. All heads turned to Daniel. His face was ashen. Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The meeting ended in chaos. People swarmed around me, touching my arm, whispering words of support. For the first time in weeks, I felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. That night, as I laid the binders on my kitchen table, I realized something profound. My son and his wife had power when I stayed silent. But once I spoke, their empire of whispers began to crumble. Still, I knew this was only the first step. Their pride ran deep, and pride rarely surrenders quietly. The storm was far from over. I should have expected it. Pride wounded often turns poisonous. The very next morning, a letter appeared in my mailbox, not handwritten, not kind. It bore the letterhead of a Denver law office. Dear Mrs. McCarthy, we represent Mr. and Mrs. Daniel McCarthy. They are concerned for your well-being and request an immediate guardianship hearing to determine your mental competence. My knees buckled. Guardianship. They were trying to have me declared unfit, to strip me of every right I still had. I called Gail, my lawyer, and she came straight away. This isn't just a threat, she said, scanning the papers. They've already filed. Court date is set for 3 weeks from now. I sat down hard. They want to take my life while I'm still breathing. But Gail's eyes gleamed with something fiery. Then we fight, and Dorothy, we fight with everything you've got. In the days that followed, whispers turned into war. Rebecca spread stories at the grocery store, telling people I was forgetting names. Confusing days. Daniel cornered the pastor after service, insisting I was being manipulated by outsiders. The cruelest cut came when I overheard my grandson Jacob talking with his friends in the yard. "Grandma's losing it," he said, his voice sharp with teenage cruelty. "Dad says she can't even pay her bills anymore." I went inside and closed the door before they saw the tears spill. But then something shifted. One night, as I was sorting through old documents, I found a file my late husband Harold had kept locked away. Inside was a letter, signed by him 15 years earlier, transferring full authority of a trust fund into my name. Not only was it still active, it held nearly $400,000, money Daniel had no idea even existed. My breath caught. Harold had written in his familiar, steady hand, "If anything ever happens, Dorothy will know what to do. Protect her at all costs." This does. For the first time, I smiled. A real unshaken smile. The court hearing came faster than I expected. The courtroom was packed. Rebecca in her sleek blazer, Daniel in his pressed suit, both looking so sure of themselves. They had witnesses lined up, neighbors, even Jacob, ready to claim I was slipping into confusion. But when the judge called my name, I stood straighter than I had in years. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear, "I have evidence." Gail placed the trust documents on the table, the ink crisp against the cream paper. The judge flipped through, frowning, then looked at Daniel. "Did you know about this trust?" Daniel's fez drained of color. "No, she must be mistaken." But the judge cut him off. "The handwriting, notarization, and financial trail are clear. This proves not only competence but foresight." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca's composure cracked. She's making this up," she hissed. But the judge was unmoved. "Mrs. McCarthy, you remain in full control of your estate." Petition denied. Daniel's fists clenched. Rebecca's eyes blazed. Their plan had collapsed in front of the entire town. As I walked out of the courtroom, I heard someone whisper behind me, "She's sharper than all of them put together." And for the first time in years, I believed it. But I also knew the fight wasn't over. Pride never dies easily. Something darker was still coming. I thought the courtroom would be the end of it. I thought Daniel and Rebecca would hang their heads, accept their defeat, and retreat quietly into their own lives. But arrogance never bows easily. 2 nights later, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. My heart pounded as I peeked through the curtains. It was Daniel, fumbling with something at the side door. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. By the time the squad car's headlights cut across the lawn, he was already on the porch. Rebecca stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed like a sentry. The officer escorted Daniel away, but not before he hissed, "You won't win, Mother. You think you're clever, but we'll make sure you end up with nothing." The next morning, I went straight to the bank. I had Harold's trust fund secured, but something inside me said that wasn't enough. I sat across from this banker, a young woman named Chloe with gentle eyes. "I want to freeze every account Daniel and Rebecca can access," I told her. She hesitated. "Are you sure, Mrs. McCarthy? These are joint accounts they've been using for years." "Yes," I said firmly. "They left me in the cold. It's time they learn what cold truly feels like." Within an hour, their credit cards, debit cards, and online transfers were locked. I walked out of that bank lighter than I had in decades. That night the phone rang. Rebecca's voice shrieked through the receiver. What did you do? At the grocery store, our card got declined. At the gas station, too. The banker said it was you. I let her words wash over me like the storm they were, then calm and steady. I said, maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to be left outside with nothing. Click. Silence. The following week, the whispers around town grew louder. Neighbors who once pitied me now crossed the street to pat my hand, whispering, "Good for you, Dorothy." Even the pastor, once swayed by Daniel's smooth words, stood at my door. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Truth always rises, doesn't it?" And then came the final twist. A letter in the mail, not from Daniel, not from Rebecca, but from Jacob, my grandson. It was scrawled in his messy teenage handwriting. "Grandma, I didn't know. Dad made me say those things in court. I was scared, Dad." When Mom's card got declined at the pharmacy, she screamed at the cashier, "I wanted to disappear. I'm sorry. I don't want to be like them. Please don't give up on me." Tears blurred the page. For all the bitterness, there was still something worth saving. So I wrote back, "You will always have a place here, but you must choose the kind of man you want to become. My door is open, not for their cruelty, but for your courage." Days later, Jacob showed up at my porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes downcast but determined. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Harold and I once dreamed of a family built on love, not greed. For the first time in years, the silence felt like healing, not loneliness. And in that moment, I understood the lesson I had to carry and share. Family is not about blood alone. Family is about who shelters you when the storm hits, not who throws you into it. Sometimes the ones you raise will turn cold, but sometimes, just sometimes, one heart can thaw again. I lost a son and a daughter-in-law to pride, but I gained something greater, the strength to stand, the wisdom to guard what is mine, and the chance to guide a grandson who still had time to change. They left me outside in the cold, but in the end, I froze their cruelty, reclaimed my dignity, and found warmth where it mattered most. And I will never again apologize for protecting myself.